It's definitely not clear who the best player is here in Sacramento, and we could have plenty of arguments about who the number one option should be on this team. But I do think it's pretty clear that DeMar DeRozan, in terms of veteran leadership, is the top guy here in Sacramento. So I pose this question. What is in it for DeMar to give 110% for this Sacramento Kings team? Beyond just being a professional, how do the Kings sell this season to DeMar and get complete buy-in from him? Kenny Caraway from ESPN 1320 joins me to discuss that right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all offseason long. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports anchor and reporter for ABC 10 News. A week from now, we will be in day 2 of Sacramento Kings training camp. Very excited to actually have on-court examples of what's happening with the Sacramento Kings, right? Things that we can reference, things that we can look at, and we can finally end all the hypothetical conversations of what things are going to look like. But this question has been lingering in the back of my head, and I thought, you know what, let's spend a podcast. I'll bring a guest in like Kenny Caraway, and we'll talk through this, because while I have all the respect in the world for the professionalism and the veteran and the Hall of Fame career of DeMar DeRozan, I do wonder, just like I can be a professional at my job, but have times where I don't want to give my all because I don't feel like giving my all matters, or I don't like the direction of the company, or whatever the case may be. I wonder if that there's going to be a lot of that this season with DeMar DeRozan. The way the Sacramento Kings were, or at least optically what they were when he joined versus what they are now, very, very different. So Kenny and I dive into this deeply. We discuss all this. Want to hear your thoughts on this too. Hit me up at MattGeorgeSac on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. Feel free to weigh in on this conversation in the comment section down below if you're watching on YouTube too, about DeMar DeRozan's motivations for this season and how the Sacramento Kings can sell this year to him and get the absolute most out of him. We're less than a week away from Media Day and the start of training camp, and Media Day is funny every year because you talk to players and they think they're winning a championship, the team's perfect, they're playoff bound, everything's going to be great. But then once the actual season starts and the adversity starts, that's where you really see the true players and who's truly bought in. And this podcast is not a question of, is DeMar DeRozan bought in or not? It's not a question of DeMar DeRozan's commitment or his professionalism or anything like that, because we know DeMar is a pro. But the question is a fair question and a realistic question to ask. What is in it for DeMar? How do the Sacramento Kings currently, the way they are, sell themselves to DeMar? This is why we need you to 100% buy in to what's going on here. So to help chat about that and kind of figure that out and put that together, Kenny Caraway, the KC and D-Lo and KC from ESPN 1320 joins me right now. KC, it's a pleasure to have DeMar on the roster, but it's fair to say that the Kings, where they're at now and where they were at when he joined them, are almost polar opposite. Well, maybe not polar opposites, but very different from when he first signed up to be a King.
I agree, man. And I'm glad you had a little pause, because I don't know if they're polar opposites. I think the talent level on the team arguably is equal, right? It just looks different. It's a different makeup. It's a different group of guys. When you talk about De'Aaron Fox and the way at that time people were looking at Malik Monk to go along with Keegan Murray and all these other guys. Kevin Huerter was on the team as well. And now you look at it, and Zach LaVine, I think he's a really, really good NBA player. You know, we could get into his contract at some point, if he's worth that and all that other stuff. But The numbers don't lie. The eye test doesn't lie. You just look at him play and the skill level that he has. He's a high level NBA player, but it's different than when De'Aaron Fox was here, right? The fit and, and where the shots come from and everything, it's different. So I think that's the key word when you talk about DeMar DeRozan going into last year's training camp with that team and going into this year's training camp with this particular team. It's a different group of guys. I don't know if it's better or worse, but it's definitely a different group of guys.
I think the difference for me too is like what DeMar's role is or what he is to the team, because I looked at the polar opposite thing for me is DeMar is the missing piece of a young team that's been there and needs to take it to the next level. Okay, now you bring in a Hall of Fame caliber scorer with an incredible career to be that boost. Now you're bringing DeMar in as the question number 1, number 2, sometimes number 3 option on a older, now veteran laden team that is going to be scratching and clawing for a top 6 seed and more than likely going to be play-in bound, or at least that's where they're projected to be. So DeMar's going from being the missing piece of a young rising squad to now stuck in the mud isn't the right word, but if I'm DeMar, I'm looking at, I'm with the Sacramento Kings the same way I looked at now with the Chicago Bulls, except this time I'm in the Western Conference. So it's arguably more difficult.
Right. And so this is where I say different, right? Because is what he's walking into, the perception of what he was walking into last year may not have fit the reality and may not be that much different than what we have right now. Because really the only difference when you talk about carrying the load and being the primary scorer and all this other stuff is you had De'Aaron Fox there compared to Zach LaVine right there, right now. Before going into last year, it was like, oh, we've got DeMar and we've got Sabonis and Keegan is who he is, and maybe DeMar can kind of get in where he fits in and situationally lead this team on the offensive end. And that might not have been reality. Like we look at Sabonis right now. Is Sabonis any different last year as a player, just as a player? Is he any different last year than he is going into this year? I don't think so. I think he's the same type of guy. I think he is a guy that in an ideal situation, he's probably your 3rd option on the offensive end. That's what he was last year, but we didn't look at it that way. I can't speak for you or anybody else, but I didn't look at it that way, right? I thought, okay, you got Fox as your 1, you got Sabonis as your 2, and DeMar will get in where he fits in. And that probably wasn't reality. Also, you look at Keegan Murray, and I think Keegan Murray has a ton of ability, but I don't know if he's ever going to be that guy that you look at as being the 2nd scorer on a team and averaging 21 plus a night, and DeMar can fall back into the 3rd option role in that case. So in reality, I think what he's getting into this year isn't that different than last year. Once again, it's just where the points are coming from, where the offense is coming from, De'Aaron Fox compared to Zach LaVine. And to be honest with you, I don't know if Zach LaVine is the guy that is looking to be a number 1 scorer as well. So maybe DeMar is kind of thrust into this number 1 option role more than he was last year. But when you talk about Sabonis, when you talk about Keegan, those guys were there last year going into the season, and they're here this year, and I think it's the same type of role. So I think DeMar, ideally, like if you asked him, he'd probably want to be the 3rd option on a really good team. But you look around, and I don't know if he has that luxury with this team, with the Kings. He's going to have to, at the worst, be a 2nd option, I think, on this team scoring-wise.
And that right there is where like the biggest changes for me. You might be 100% right. The reality of what last year's team was that he joined and what this year's team now isn't that different. But the perception from DeMar, in addition to everybody, was this is what I'm joining. I'm coming to Sacramento to win. I chose Sacramento to win. Now he's here in Sacramento right now after coming off of what he claimed to be the most chaotic, wild season he's ever been through. He said he's never experienced anything like what he went through in Sacramento last year. Hey, welcome to the Kings, pal. But now he's coming into this year and he knows a little bit better. So therein lies the question for me of, now that you know a little bit, now that you maybe are aware of what the reality is, why would you give your all here? And, going into this offseason, Casey, that turned out to be one of the worst off seasons in NBA history. Just a boring offseason with the exception of Jonathan Kuminga watch.
Right.
Going into the offseason, I thought DeMar is for sure gone. And it's not because he would want out, but I think it would make the most sense for the Kings who are making a change, and DeMar, who obviously is looking for what he's looking for, to part ways. We found out pretty quickly that Scott Perry wanted DeMar DeRozan here. Plus, the market isn't great for any trades right now, but I've been told Scott Perry wants DeMar DeRozan here. He likes DeMar to help kick off this new era of Kings basketball. So we know Scott Perry and DeMar have already met, probably had multiple conversations. Scott Perry, or Doug Christie, is now an extension of Scott Perry, and Doug Christie already has a great relationship with DeMar. But day one of training camp, or even before that, when these guys meet and they're walking into training camp in the true start of the season, like if you're Scott Perry or Doug Christie and you're talking to DeMar, I don't know if you have to sell it to him, but what are you asking of DeMar DeRozan that you feel is a fair ask for complete buy-in with the state of this organization right now and where the team is at?
I'm asking DeMar DeRozan, if I'm Scott Perry and Doug Christie, to be the foundation of changing the narrative, changing the culture here in Sacramento, being the representation of what we want a Sacramento King player to be. And that's not the same as saying, I want you to come in here and lead us to a championship or be part of a championship team. But I do think with a guy like DeMar DeRozan, that is something that's could potentially be appealing, to be the focal point, the foundation of a culture change. It's something that I think he respects. I think he appreciates. Now, that's not the end all be all. I think there's been conversations where they go to DeMar DeRozan and they say, this is how we look at you as a player, as a leader, and we want you to instill that in the entire roster and the entire franchise. However, if things aren't going right, if we don't have an opportunity to be a play-in team or be potentially a playoff team, we will look out for you because of that. We will look out for you and try to see if we can get you to a contender, because we know where you're at in your career. You're at the spot where you're looking to be somewhere where you can win and you can be successful and potentially make some type of run in the playoffs. So there's a level of mutual respect between Scott Perry and Doug Christie and DeMar DeRozan, where, hey, we're going to try to win. We're going to try and turn this thing around. We want you to be a part of us trying to turn this thing around. But if it's not working out, we're not going to just keep you here. We're not going to keep you here to dry. We're going to make sure we take care of you and do everything we can to get you in a spot that you're okay with and that you have an opportunity to win with. And part of that is you got to play well. You got to be appealing if that's the case. We may not have a good record, but if you're out there playing the way you have pretty much your entire career, being a reliable scorer, being a clutch scorer, you got to be appealable to some of these players out here, or some of these teams out here. And that's kind of the give and take. Like you can not be bought in all you want, but that's only going to hurt you at the end of the day, because how are we going to get you to Cleveland if you're having career lows in shooting percentage and shot attempts and all this other stuff? So I think it's a win-win for both if DeMar DeRozan is bought in going into the season.
Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here. We are settling in, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. That's it, just $5. If your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. You can use those bonus bets in so many fun ways to make yourselves a lot of money and make your Sundays even more fun. You can do it with like player props, or you can build a same game parlay about one game in particular that you're watching. Maybe it's like the Sunday night game or the Thursday night game, whatever. You can build a same game parlay around that, or you can jump in live. If you're watching a game on Sunday already and you just feel like you know how the game's going to go, you can jump in live and bet on the action as it is unfolding. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just following your fantasy lineups. It's quick, it's easy, And it's the best way to add a little more energy to your Thursdays, Sundays, and Mondays. So if you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. So this would never happen because you don't do this, right? If I were to ask at media day, if I were to ask DeMar a very similar question to I asked you, and his response would be very similar to what you laid out. Again, he would never say this because he'd get ripped to shreds for it. But if he were to come out and be forthright and say, my motivation for being here right now is to play as well as I can to audition for a contender to come out and get me at the trade deadline. Would that make you, would you be like, would you feel good about that? Would you be okay with that? It would be completely honest, but essentially my motivation for how I'm going to approach this season and how I'm going to handle the remainder of my time wearing a Sacramento Kings jersey is I'm going to try and play well enough so I can get up out of here and get into an actual winning situation. I would respect the hell out of it if he said that, to be completely honest with you. And I could make an argument that it's in the best interest of the Sacramento Kings long-term to have that happen, to find a home for DeMar and a good trade for DeMar at this trade deadline. But if that's his motivation for playing for the Sacramento Kings, winning helps with that, but winning isn't the goal. It's playing well enough to get out of here. Would you respect that? Would you feel okay with that, even if it came from any other player?
I mean, it's like you just kind of laid out. I wouldn't want him to say that because of PR dynamics, team dynamics, locker room dynamics, all this other stuff. But just like you said, I'd respect the heck out of it, man. I think it would be a real statement, a real outlook on the situation. And also, things can change, right? Like, we were all there at the play-in game in Dallas, and I talked to some people right there courtside minutes after the game, and people who would know, people who have influence, and they're like, "Oh yeah, DeMar DeRozan is gone. Like he's gone. Don't worry about it. Like it's over. He won't be back here in Sacramento." And they weren't even saying that in way of like getting him out of here. There was people who were like, "No, I'm going to get him out of here because he doesn't deserve this. He doesn't need to be here."
Sure.
And a couple different people were hired. Couple different conversations were had. And I'm not saying like, oh, I want to end my career here in Sacramento. That's how he's thinking. But at the very least, he was like, okay, I can see the vision. I'm here. I say that to say he could have that type of mindset going into the season and playing just to get out of here. And then who knows, him playing well and him starting out playing just to audition for other teams could turn into, number one, him actually achieving that and playing well. And that could lead to them, the Kings, being a good team, being 11 games over 500. And just like at the end of the season, compared to after the first few conversations with Scott Perry, things changed. The same could happen in that situation. He could be playing well. The team's winning. The vibes are up here in Sacramento. We all know how it is when the Kings are winning and the vibes are up. Sacramento is one of the best places to be in all of the NBA. You can get wrapped up in that and say, you know what, I know I came into the season with the mindset of I'm auditioning for other teams, but we got a good thing going right here. I'm playing well. Let me see if I can get this team to the playoffs and see what that looks like, because this is a special place when the Kings are playing well. So to answer your question, to sum it all up, I wouldn't have a problem with it at all personally. But I also know that could lead to something different. Even if his motivation was to audition for other teams, that could lead to him wanting to stay here and helping this team play well and overachieve with what they're trying to do.
Yeah, it's a very, and I acknowledge this ahead of time, it's a very glass half empty or glass half full way of looking at things. Because for me, and this is not a DeMar thing as much as it is a team thing, I think if the Sacramento Kings play as a group of individuals, which is exactly what they are, they're a roster of very talented individuals, but we question the cohesiveness as a unit. It's Doug Christie's job to try and find a way to make this team work. But if you have a group of individuals that if DeMar's motivations are playing to move to a contender, if Levine's motivations are, I'm just going to get my numbers and stay healthy, if Sabonis's motivations are being an all NBA player individually, arguably winning helps all of them. Of course, if Keegan and Keon are motivations are getting paid, winning helps all of that for sure. But to me, the only way this works, and what I mean work is become a top 6 seed in the Western Conference, let's say, like be an established playoff team and truly be competitive on a nightly basis. The only way it works is for them to figure out how to be a team. And I think back to Beam Team 1, and there were great individual performances from Fox winning Clutch Player of the Year to Sabonis and his triple doubles and everything like that. So there were still wonderful individual performances. But as a team, at least identity-wise, offensively, they had something as a unit that worked, and that's what I believe led to that fantastic year. So again, glass half full, glass half empty way of looking at it. I just worry about too much individual mindset from a lot of individually talented players not working, because there needs to be more of a team buy-in. And I feel like DeMar has to be an extension of Doug Christie. He has to be the leader of that team buy-in, or it's never going to work.
I agree 100%. And when I hear what you say, you're 100% correct. And I think that is in place for everybody involved.
Sure.
That's usually when this is brought up here in Sacramento, that the finger is pointed at DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine when we talk about buy-in, playing selfish, playing as a team, all this other stuff.
100%.
I look at that as everybody involved.
You're right.
If the right way for this team to be successful is to have the ball in DeMar DeRozan's hands or have the ball in Zach LaVine's hands, then Domantas Sabonis, you may not like that, but you can't pout about that. I'm not saying he did last year, or I'm not saying he would, but I'm saying I do believe that Domantas Sabonis wants things to run through him offensively. And if the best way for this team to win is for the ball to not run through him offensively as much, he can't pout about that.
Sure.
He's got to find other ways to be effective and other ways to help the team. Just like if the best way is for the ball to go through Sabonis, DeMar DeRozan has to find other ways to help the team. He can't pout about that. But I want to be perfectly clear with the mindset that has to be for everybody. And when we talk about running the offense and all this other stuff and everything that needs to be, Matt, the offense wasn't a problem last year.
Sure.
People talk about like, oh, we ran it through DeMar and there's no cohesion on the offense. They didn't have a problem scoring last year. That wasn't an issue. The issue was on the defensive end. The issue might have been, okay, when the offense was going through somebody else, other people were just standing around as opposed to cutting or rebounding or getting back on defense. Like there were other issues other than DeMar DeRozan just having the basketball and shooting the ball more than people would want to. So I think Doug Christie's, he's got to find out what you need to do on the offensive end. But most importantly, he's got to find a way and devise a scheme that defensively these guys can stay in games and they can find a way to be competitive night in and night out with what they do on the defensive end. And that also takes buy-in from all 5 guys on the court. DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine, just being perfectly frank, aren't the only subpar defenders on that court. They have to step up their game on the defensive end, but there's other people who have to step up their game on the defensive end as well, whether it's Domantas Sabonis, whether it's my guy Malik Monk when he gets into the game, whether it's Drew Eubanks or Maxime Reynal, they've got to step up what they do team defensively as well. So I look at this situation as a lot of people get frustrated with the offense. Once again, the offense wasn't an issue last year unless I saw things wrong. They scored points relatively, I don't want to say easily, but they weren't a team that scored 89 points a game. They were able to put the ball
in the NBA. Eighth in the NBA. They averaged 115 points per game.
Yeah, they could score. They've got to find a way, and this is Coach Christie's his number one priority, I think, how to compete on the defensive end and stay afloat on the defensive end.
You're 100% right with everything that you just laid out. It is never just a DeMar DeRozan or Zach LaVine issue. The reason why, I mean, LaVine, I did a podcast about this earlier in the offseason, and we might have even discussed this on your show. The issues that people have with Zach LaVine have nothing to do with Zach LaVine. They have everything to do with the amount of money Zach LaVine's being paid and that the Kings traded for him. Like that, like that's what people are frustrated with Zach LaVine about. Has nothing to do with Zach. Now we might go through a whole season and find new frustrations with Zach as a player. I'm sure we'll experience that. If there's anything that I had an issue with Zach last year, it was those handful of games that for some reason it just didn't look like he was trying to score first. And Doug Christie explained that He was trying to be a good teammate, but also he was going through his wife just having a baby and moving across the country. So look, life experiences happen. These things, just like everybody's job. But the reason why I'm having this conversation specifically about DeMar, it's not because it's DeMar's fault if it doesn't work, and it's DeMar gets all the credit if it does work. For me, it's what you talked about with the defensive buy-in. If I'm Nick Clifford, if I'm Devin Carter, if I'm anybody on this roster from number 2 down to number 15, and I look at DeMar as number 1 in terms of leading by example, leadership on this roster, that just because of his pedigree, that's what I look at. DeMar, we could argue who's the best player on this team, doesn't matter. DeMar to me is the de facto leader. The reason why I'm talking about DeMar is if he's not willing to give 110% on the defensive end, if Doug Christie's asking everybody, then why in the world would guy 15 through 2 do it? And again, this is not a question of, is DeMar a lazy defender or anything like that at all. The question is, why should DeMar give that to this team in its current state? It's not that I don't think DeMar or that the Kings deserve it and DeMar's not going to give it to him. It's what is it about the Kings right now that will motivate DeMar to do that game 30 of the season? That's what this whole conversation is about.
No, I completely understand that. And if it does happen, I think the two things that I'll point to DeMar kind of being willing and able to do that is, number one, we've talked on it. I know we look for different angles, but sometimes the one is just staring you right in the face, and it is his professionalism. I think he's a pro. The 100%. Way he approaches playing the game of basketball, preparing for each season, it's just who he is. There's a set of I don't know DeMar, but I've listened to him and heard him speak enough. There's a level of morals that he has as a man that trickles into how he is as a basketball player, which leads into him just being professional. That's what he believes as a man. So I don't think that can just be, not saying you are or anybody else is, but we can't just sidestep that. That's how he's going to approach things. I also think the other thing is I think he takes a little pride, and this also goes back into morals and how he was brought up and how he approaches things and views things, and being the vet, being a guy that lays the groundwork for the people that are coming behind him. And you talk about Nick Clifford and you talk about Keegan Murray. I think there is a level of DeMar DeRozan wants to show them how to be a professional, how to play, how this NBA game works, not only on the court, but off the court, preparing yourself, preserving your body, making sure that you're always in tip-top shape to the best of your abilities. And that also goes into how you approach being coached, the amount of respect that you have for certain guys like Doug Christie who show respect to you as a basketball player, and how you perform for them out there on the floor. Does that mean that DeMar DeRozan is going to stay in the stance all the time and be in pistols at all times and help? No. I mean, at the end of the day, that's not who he is as a defender, as a basketball player for his entire career. That's just not his strength. But I do think there are going to be moments where we see DeMar DeRozan giving all out effort on the defensive end, going for 50-50 balls, getting on the floor and showing these young guys. I think that's part of the pitch that maybe Scott Perry and Doug Christie have for him. Hey, we want you to once again be the pillar of what we're trying to establish as a culture, and for people to look at you, the Nick Cliffords, the Keegan Murrays, Devin Carter, to look at you as that's a pro, and that's how I want to model playing the game of basketball, and that's how I want to model being a Sacramento Kings player. And I think that's something that appeals to DeMar DeRozan, and he takes pride into. So once again, haven't had a conversation with the guy, and only time will tell with how he actually performs out there on the floor and approaches every game. But I'm going into it believing that's how he's approaching things. And that's one of the reasons why he stayed around, because that was appealing enough to get him to say, I'll see how this starts. I'll give this a fair shot.
Finally, KC, I asked Chris Biederman this. I asked Jake Gaden this. There are a million different storylines or things to be curious about with this group going into training camp. Now, you're going to be in the in the studio hosting radio shows by the time that Kings training camp practices are wrapping up. So we'll have our feet on the ground. You won't necessarily be there, but you're still going to be locked in and following closely. Give me a one or two, or however many you want to, just ones that pop to mind of, man, this is a storyline. This is something that I'm really curious to learn about, or I'm keeping an eye out for during this training camp and preseason process to try and learn about this team. It could be literally anything about this organization and this team and where they're at right now in training camp. Is there a storyline that really jumps out to you that, like, man, I'm really honing in on this. I'm really paying attention, looking for this?
For me, it's there's two.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, Doug Christie.
Yep.
I'm a big believer in the man, Doug Christie. I'm a big believer in the basketball mind, Doug Christie. And when you talk about those two components, when I talk about the man, I talk about somebody that people have the ultimate respect for, Doug Christie. I always say this on the air. If I run into somebody that has a problem with Doug Christie, I'm going to look at that person sideways, not Doug Christie, because I haven't met too many people, if any, that have a problem with how Doug Christie carries himself as a man and as a professional. And I look at that and I say, guys like Zach LaVine, guys like DeMar DeRozan, guys even in this weird situation that's going on with the trade rumors, like Malik Monk, can look at Doug Christie and say, you know what, I'm not crazy about everything that's going on, but I respect this man right here. I respect this man enough not to dog it, not to check out on this team completely. I'm going to be here because he's had conversations with me and he's talked to me, and I respect the way he goes about business. So I just think I want to see how that works out if things are different as a full-time NBA head coach. We can talk about him as an assistant and just as a mentor and how people look at him. But once you get into that big seat, things get different. There's a lot of people who are respectable and command respect who've gotten fired, who have players not play for him. So I want to see if that dynamic carries over to him being a head coach. The other thing, Matt, is I want to see what Dennis Schroeder brings to this team. I am very interested in what that looks like because I'm a big fan of his. And we saw in Eurobasket, and we've seen for the last 3 to 5 years in international play, what he's meant as a leader, as a guy, a floor general on the floor and a leader off the floor to that German national team, and how he's excelled in international play. And that is leadership qualities that I believe that this team needs, this franchise needs. And when you talk about what he was able to bring in stops like Brooklyn and stops like Detroit, people rave about his leadership, his defensive tenacity, him being a table setter. That's one of the things he talked about in his introductory press conference, is I'm here to make the people around me better. I never thought about Dennis Schroeder in that vein before actually being locked into the way that he plays. But hearing him speak, seeing him once again in international play and really diving into how he approached that, I'm interested to see if he's able to bring that to this Kings team, because one of the things we talk about all the time, the jokes are made about Chicago West and bringing LaVine and DeRozan over here and doing the same things that the Bulls did, and it wasn't successful. The one time it was successful, they had a true PG in Lonzo Ball to set the table and get these guys the ball in the places where they're most comfortable. And I think Lonzo is a better point guard just in my mind than Dennis Schroeder, but that doesn't mean Dennis Schroeder is a bad point guard. And I wonder if that ability to set the table and lead that offense, we talked about the ball being in DeRozan and LaVine's hands and not in Sabonis' hands. Maybe it's best if it's in Schroeder's hands and let him run the offense, and how this team reacts to that. So I'm anxious to see how that works out in training camp and going into the start of the season. Doug Christie's respect that he commands, and Dennis Schroeder as a leader and a point guard on this team.
Earlier this summer, I talked to my guy Big Dave from Chicago, and he basically laid out the same thing. Dennis Schroeder is arguably the key that makes all of this work. So we'll keep an eye on that. There's a million things to keep an eye on.
That's a crazy sentence.
Right? Isn't it? It makes some people nervous, but hey, it has the chance to be fun. you're going to, no matter what, you and D'Lo and of course, James Ham and Kyle Madsen, everybody over at ESPN 1320 will have all the storylines and all the discussions throughout training camp, preseason, the entire season. So keep up the good work over there. This will not be the last time you have Kenny Caraway here on Locked On Kings, as long as he's kind enough to share the time. So Casey, thank you, my friend. Let's get this show on the road. It's finally, the talk is over. Now we can finally get actual on-court substance. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, indeed, man. Anytime for you, man. Appreciate you, dog.